I'm sure you've heard the news, and more importantly, you've felt it in your wallet. Everything costs more. That weekly grocery bill, the price at the gas pump, the rent for your apartment. It feels like the value of your money is shrinking, and in a way, it is. This phenomenon has a name: inflation. Simply put, inflation is the rate at which the general level of prices for goods and services is rising, and subsequently, the purchasing power of currency is falling. A little bit of inflation, around 2% per year, is often considered a sign of a healthy, growing economy. It encourages people to spend and invest rather than hoard cash, which keeps the economic engine running. But what we've experienced recently is different. Prices have been rising much faster than that gentle, predictable pace. This rapid inflation erodes savings, complicates financial planning for families and businesses, and can create widespread economic uncertainty. So, what's behind it? It's tempting to look for a single culprit, a simple explanation. But blaming just one thing? That's too simple. The reality is that the recent surge in inflation is a complex story, a perfect storm of multiple forces hitting the global economy all at once. Over the course of this series, we're going to unpack that story piece by piece. We'll explore the powerful surge in consumer demand that followed the pandemic lockdowns. We'll investigate the unprecedented disruptions to global supply chains that left shelves empty. We'll examine the shocks to energy and food markets, the role of government policy, and the pressures from labor and housing markets. We'll also look at how we measure inflation, who is most affected by it, and what tools central banks and governments have to bring it back under control. Finally, we'll discuss the outlook and some practical tips for navigating this challenging economic environment. Our story begins with one of the most fundamental laws of economics: supply and demand. After months of being cooped up during pandemic lockdowns, people were eager to spend. This wasn't just a return to normal, it was a tidal wave of pent-up demand. People spent like it was 2019, but with a crucial difference. With services like travel, dining, and live entertainment still restricted or perceived as risky, a huge amount of that spending was redirected towards physical goods. New cars, electronics, furniture, home improvement supplies, demand for these items skyrocketed. This massive, sudden shift created an imbalance that the global production system was simply not prepared to handle. While demand was roaring back to life, the supply side of the economy was still broken. Global supply chains, the intricate web that moves parts and products around the world, had been severely damaged by the pandemic. Factories couldn't keep up due to lockdowns and labor shortages. Shipping couldn't keep up, with containers in the wrong places and ports hopelessly backlogged. And crucially, the production of tiny essential components like semiconductor chips couldn't keep up. This created bottlenecks for everything from cars to washing machines, further limiting the supply of goods that consumers were desperately trying to buy. This mismatch, soaring demand hitting a wall of constrained supply, was a classic recipe for higher prices. On top of these demand and supply issues, the world was hit by major supply shocks in two of the most critical sectors: energy and food. Geopolitical events disrupted the global supply of oil and natural gas, causing energy prices to spike. And since energy is a key input for almost everything, from manufacturing to transportation, those higher costs rippled through the entire economy. At the same time, extreme weather events and geopolitical conflicts impacted harvests and food supply chains, pushing grocery bills even higher. The third major factor was policy. In response to the pandemic's economic threat, governments and central banks injected massive amounts of money into the economy. This included huge fiscal stimulus programs like direct payments to households and extremely loose monetary policy like near-zero interest rates and large-scale asset purchases, often called quantitative easing. While these measures were crucial in preventing a deeper economic collapse, they also acted as an accelerant for inflation. They put more cash into the hands of consumers and businesses, further fueling demand at a time when the supply of goods and services was already struggling to keep up. This created the classic inflationary scenario: too much money chasing too few goods. Two other critical areas added to the inflationary fire: labor and housing. The pandemic reshuffled the labor market, leading to widespread worker shortages in certain industries. To attract and retain employees, companies had to offer higher wages. While good for workers, this increased business costs, and those costs were often passed on to customers in the form of higher prices. Simultaneously, the housing market heated up. Low interest rates and a desire for more space during the pandemic drove up demand for homes, pushing both purchase prices and rental costs to new highs. Since shelter is one of the biggest components of household spending, rising rents became a major and persistent driver of overall inflation. So how do we track all these price changes? Economists use price indexes, with the most well-known being the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. The CPI measures the average change over time in the prices paid by urban consumers for a market basket of consumer goods and services. This includes everything from gasoline and groceries to haircuts and concert tickets. When you hear that inflation is at 7%, it usually means the CPI has increased by 7% over the last year. We'll explore how this is calculated and what other measures, like core inflation, tell us. While inflation affects everyone, it doesn't affect everyone equally. It hits lower-income households the hardest, as a larger portion of their budget goes toward necessities like food, energy, and rent, the very categories that have seen the steepest price increases. It also hurts those on fixed incomes, like retirees, whose purchasing power steadily diminishes. Understanding these distributional impacts is crucial for crafting fair and effective policy responses. So, what's the fix? This brings us to the solutions, which are as multifaceted as the causes. The primary tool belongs to central banks, which can cool demand by raising interest rates. This makes borrowing more expensive for consumers and businesses, slowing down spending and investment that's already happening around the world. But real lasting relief also requires fixing the supply side of the economy. This means investing in smoother logistics, building more resilient supply chains, and increasing our capacity to produce everything from energy to housing. These are longer-term solutions, but they are essential for preventing future inflationary spirals. We'll also look at the role of smarter fiscal choices and targeted support for those hit hardest, ensuring the medicine doesn't cause more harm than the disease. Finally, we'll look ahead. The goal of policymakers is not to make prices fall, but to slow the rate of their growth back to a more manageable level, a soft landing. This process takes time. We'll discuss the expected path for inflation and offer some practical tips for your own finances, like budgeting, managing debt, and understanding how your wages and investments can keep pace. So, stick with us. Understanding inflation isn't just for economists. It's essential for navigating your financial life. By breaking down its many causes and potential solutions, we can move beyond the headlines and get to the real story of why everything costs more.